I've been through several phases in my life, from student to instructional designer and instructor. I'm also a spouse, a mom, and a hobbyist, and several other things. One thing I know is that all of these phases require, at one time or another, for me to take notes. You're probably like me. When you think about taking notes, you think of notepads. And if you're like me, you have several of them scattered around your desk or your house. And the problem is that you know you wrote it down somewhere, but you're always flipping back and forth through pages or trying to find that one notepad where you know you wrote it down. Well, luckily for us, Microsoft has come up with a solution. It's called OneNote. OneNote isn't a new application for Office, but like the other applications, it is improved. Since a lot of people aren't familiar with OneNote, in this particular chapter, we'll look at some OneNote basics. Not in depth, we actually have a whole course for that, but a review for people who may not be familiar with it, and then get right into all of the new features Office has to offer, including the ability for you to take notes and to link them into your regular Office documents. This is an exciting new way to finally get rid of all of those notepads from your desk and your house. OneNote uses the paradigm of the notepad that we're used to using in the real world to keep information. More accurately, though, it's like a 3-ring binder or a notebook because it has more than just pages. If I wanted to keep track of information on a project, a customer, a hobby, or a class, I could keep it all in a OneNote notebook, just like I would have a notebook for all of those purposes. Let's say, for example, that I'm working on a Windows 7 project. I could be doing this for several different reasons. I could be a consumer who wants to know if I want to upgrade to it. I could be a student researching Windows 7 for a school project. I could be a salesperson trying to figure out how to best market the Windows 7 services that my company offers. Or maybe I'm part of a company that is implementing Windows 7 for our staff. In all of these situations, I'll need to gather and collect information from a variety of sources, and possibly in a variety of formats, so that I can evaluate and combine the information for my use and possibly to communicate it with others. In order to do that, using OneNote, I'm going to create a notebook just for keeping my Windows 7 information. I've opened OneNote from my desktop, or any other method that you may have, and now I want to open a new notebook. The one we're seeing is the one that opens by default, and it's nice because it gives us a little information or a template, or an example, if you will, of how we could use OneNote. Well, that's what I'm here for, so I'll do that for you. I'll move up to my File tab, click that, and I want to create a new notebook. Just like everything else in Office, I'll click New. For our purposes, I'll store it on my computer. The next thing I need to do is name my notebook. I don't need to be very creative. I'll just call it Windows 7. Next is to define a location for the notebook. Just like you're used to whenever you save other files, I'll click and I'll navigate to my desktop. I'll scroll down a little and find my Project Files folder. Double-click on that, open Chapter 9, and then I'll say Select. Okay, so far there's nothing different from what we do in other applications, except that OneNote saves data as we work. So we have to provide initial information for saving the file before we can begin using a new notebook. We've saved it to a local system instead of to a web or to the network. We've given it a name, and we've defined the folder into which we want it to be saved. Now all we have to do from the bottom edge of the screen is click Create. What we see now is an electronic version of a 3-ring binder. However, we need to look at some of these different parts that come along with it. And as I usually do, I'll start from the top left and work down. First thing is, along the left edge, we can see tabs for any of the different notebooks that we have. The personal notebook is created by default by OneNote. I don't have to keep that. I could get rid of it, but for now, it's right there. Then, of course, I see the tab for the notebook I'm working in, which is Windows 7. You'll also see a button that allows us to expand and collapse this, so we can see them a little easier. You don't have to tilt your head sideways and try to read them if you don't want to. I'll keep that collapsed for now. As we move across, the next thing we see is that each notebook can have one or more sections, and we can rename those sections. Over on the far right-hand side, this is where we get to see pages. So by default, I'm in a notebook with one section and one page. Because this is Office, OneNote also shares the Fluent interface. And when you open OneNote, you might think, well, no, it doesn't because they didn't give me the ribbon. Actually, they did. But in OneNote, because space is so important, the ribbon is in collapsed mode. All we need to do is move to the upper right corner next to our Help button and click the little down arrow to expand the ribbon the way we'd expect to see it. Remember, this way of expanding and collapsing the ribbon is common to all of the Office applications. In OneNote, it's just minimized as the default. If we look at the tabs, we have a Home tab, Insert, several drawing tools we can use, we can put it through our views, and we can also change the views themselves. I'll move back to Home and collapse this as well to give us more space and simplify what we're looking at. So in general, this analogy of the notebook works really well. Notebooks with sections and pages. Now let's work with the structure. Remember that I'm trying to work on a Windows 7 project, and I know there are certain things that I want to capture about Windows 7. One of the first things I might do is think about the types of sections that I would have. I probably want to know about general product information. I also want to know what type of training is available. And then I'm interested in knowing what implementation concerns I need to have or how they're going to implement it within our company, depending on exactly what my purpose is. So I'll work with those different sections. As we said, sections are found at the top of the notebook, so the first thing I want to do is rename the one called New Section 1, because that's too generic and won't help me find stuff. This is just like renaming a tab in Excel or renaming a file. I can right-click on the tab, I can choose Rename, and I can type the new name, and I'll keep it fairly short. I'll call it Product Info. Then I simply press Enter to set it. Also, just like Excel, you see a little tab at the very end that will allow me to create new sections very quickly. I can do this to the ribbon, but I think clicking here is the fastest way to add new sections, so I'll click that. It comes up called New Section 1 again, and this one I'll call Training. Simply a matter of typing, once again pressing Enter. And for my last tab, I'll click one more time to create a new section and call this Implementation. There we go. That's very easy so far. But now I've decided that in my General Info section, I want to focus on the additions that are available and the features that are also provided. So I'll create pages for those. The best thing to do is always go back to the section you want first. So here I have Product Info, and I'll work on the right side of the screen. Again, there are different ways to do this. This is just one option. Currently, we can see that this is called Untitled Page, and I can right-click here, and I can click New Page. Notice Control-N will also get me the same thing. This is a little surprising to most people. It actually calls it Untitled Page and Untitled Page. It doesn't call them 1, 2, 3, 4. But that's okay. We don't care. I'll click on my first tab, and now I'm going to move over to the actual notebook page itself. You can see that it has a blinking insertion point in a little dashed area. This is actually the name of the page, so I'm going to call this first one Additions. Then I'll click on my second tab or my second page on the right, and I don't have to move my cursor at all because it's already waiting for me to name. I'll call this one Features. There are a lot of little tricks and details to this whole process that we can cover in the full OneNote class, but now you can get a feeling for what we can do and how it works very quickly in case you haven't seen OneNote before. Creating notebooks is probably the first thing that you'll want to do. How you organize them, of course, is up to you. I'm not going to dictate that, just like I wouldn't tell you what to keep in your school or work notebook. Some people like to have several notebooks with many sections. Other people prefer to have one big notebook with lots of sections in it. It will depend on your personal style and how you want to organize your information. But creating the notebooks, the sections, and the pages, and giving them meaningful names is the first step in your OneNote process.